Heaven and hell, two concepts that have captivated the minds of billions throughout human history. Often viewed as the ultimate expressions of divine justice, they promise eternal bliss for the righteous and eternal punishment for the wicked. But are heaven and hell real, tangible places? Or are they symbolic tools created to guide or control human behavior? To answer this, we delve into biblical references, the perspectives of great religious leaders like the popes, the skepticism of those who view these concepts as social constructs, and the wider debate across philosophy and science. The Bible, especially within Christianity, is the foundational source for understanding heaven and hell. These realms are described in vivid detail in the New Testament. Jesus Christ himself often spoke of heaven as a kingdom of God, a place of eternal joy and divine communion, contrasting it with hell, described as a place of outer darkness where there will be weeping and gnashing of teeth, Matthew 8 verse 12. The Gospel of John further depicts heaven as the Father's house with many rooms, emphasizing its welcoming and inclusive nature, John 14 verse 2. Meanwhile, the book of Revelation gives some of the most vivid depictions of hell, referring to the lake of fire reserved for the devil, false prophets, and those whose names are not in the book of life, Revelation 20 verse 15. Popes across history have deeply influenced the understanding of heaven and hell. Pope John Paul II, for instance, emphasized in 1999 that heaven and hell should not be thought of as physical locations but as states of existence. He described heaven as the fullness of communion with God and hell as the eternal rejection of that communion, a state resulting from human freedom. Similarly, Pope Francis has brought a nuanced view, often focusing on God's mercy and the hope of redemption. He has been cautious about overly literal interpretations of hell, once saying that the idea of eternal punishment should always be understood in the light of God's infinite love. These perspectives have often shifted focus from fear to hope, encouraging believers to live in ways that bring them closer to God rather than being driven solely by fear of hell. However, not all religious perspectives have been unifying. Critics have often pointed to the historical use of heaven and hell as tools of behavioral control. During the Middle Ages, for example, the Catholic Church wielded the fear of hell and the promise of heaven as instruments of power, reinforcing social hierarchies and ensuring obedience. Practices like the sale of indulgences, a system where people could essentially pay to reduce their punishment in the afterlife, became controversial, leading figures like Martin Luther to question the Church's motives. Critics argue that such practices exemplify how religious institutions use the afterlife as a way to manipulate followers. Skeptics and secular thinkers have long argued that the concepts of heaven and hell were invented to enforce moral codes and maintain societal order. Sigmund Freud, the father of psychoanalysis, viewed belief in an afterlife as a psychological crutch, a way for people to cope with the fear of death. Friedrich Nietzsche, the German philosopher, called such beliefs as slave morality, designed to keep people docile and compliant. Contemporary critics like Christopher Hitchens and Richard Dawkins have similarly dismissed heaven and hell as myths created to control behavior. In his book The God Delusion, Dawkins argues that the fear of hell has often been used to suppress dissent and enforce conformity within religious communities. One of the most controversial modern critiques came from Professor Bart Ehrman, a New Testament scholar. Ehrman argues in his book Heaven and Hell, A History of the Afterlife that these ideas evolved over centuries and were not originally central to Jewish or Christian theology. He suggests that early Jews believed in Sheol, a shadowy underworld, but not in eternal punishment or reward. According to Ehrman, the idea of hell as a place of torment was heavily influenced by Greek and Roman ideas, as well as Zoroastrianism, and became more defined as Christianity spread. Philosophers and historians have pointed out that the fear of hell and the hope of heaven have played powerful roles in shaping societies. While they may inspire ethical behavior, they can also be seen as mechanisms of control. By linking moral actions to eternal consequences, religious authorities have historically influenced laws, politics, and cultural norms. For example, during the Enlightenment, Many thinkers questioned whether heaven and hell were necessary to guide morality, proposing instead that humans are capable of ethical behavior without the promise of reward or the threat of punishment. On the other hand, proponents of heaven and hell argue that these concepts provide a framework for justice that is often missing in this world. For believers, heaven and hell ensure that good and evil deeds have ultimate consequences. Figures like C.S. Lewis have defended the necessity of these realms, suggesting that hell is not an act of divine cruelty but the natural consequence of a soul's choice to reject God. In The Problem of Pain, Lewis writes, "The doors of hell are locked from the inside," emphasizing the idea that those in hell choose to remain there by their own free will. Yet, even within religious communities, interpretations of heaven and hell vary. Some see these realms as physical places, while others view them as spiritual states. The Eastern Orthodox Church, for example, teaches that heaven and hell are not separate locations but the same reality experienced differently depending on one's relationship with God. In this view, God's love is experienced as bliss by the righteous and as torment by the wicked. The debate extends into science and psychology, particularly in the study of near-death experiences, NDEs. Many who have had NDEs describe seeing glimpses of heaven, peaceful, radiant places filled with love, or, in rarer cases, visions of hell. While these accounts are often cited as evidence of an afterlife, skeptics argue that they can be explained by neurological phenomena, such as oxygen deprivation in the brain. Dr. Sam Parnia, a leading researcher in resuscitation science, has studied NDEs extensively, finding that while they feel real to those who experience them, they do not necessarily prove the existence of heaven or hell. In conclusion, the question of whether heaven and hell are real remains as compelling and polarizing as ever. For some, they are literal places that await every soul after death. For others, they are symbolic constructs, offering lessons about morality and the human condition. And for skeptics, they are inventions born out of fear and a desire for control. Regardless of one's perspective, the concepts of heaven and hell challenge us to reflect on the nature of justice, morality, and our ultimate destiny, ensuring that this debate will continue to resonate for generations to come. Thank you for watching, and I will see you in the next video.